for With Great Pleasure, recorded in front of an audience at the BBC Radio Theatre.
Welcome to With Great Pleasure. And it's with great pleasure I introduce my colleagues Sheila Steafel and Bernard Cribbins. Sheila and I met. Frost Report, wasn't it? Frost Report. Very topical note there. Frost Report. And Bernie and I met a review called And Another Thing. Wasn't it?
Yes, 51 years ago.
51 years ago, dear.
I was 12.
Yeah. We used to do a double act, did we not?
We did a double act.
And we were called Los Brillos. But enough of this byplay. Let's start this odd odyssey of writing that I love with a little nugget from one of my idols, J.B. Priestley, who I knew for the last 10 years of his life. He was an absolute idol of mine, and you're very daunted at the thought of meeting an idol. You know, you hope they won't let you down. He never did. He played the curmudgeon, the Yorkshireman to the hilt, but there was always a twinkle in the eye. And he was a great fan of Monty Python. And he lived in Alveston outside Stratford-on-Avon and was really annoyed that the BBC were not broadcasting Monty Python in the Midlands at the time. And he was a big fan of John Cleese. And he said, John Cleese, I'd like him in When We Are Married, his famous comedy. And that reminds me in turn of the story of a tour of When We Are Married years ago. And there was a man in the cast called Fred Emney, great character. Big guy with a cigar and a monocle, great character. And they were doing the dress rehearsal somewhere, I think it was Guildford, and JB, Jack Priestley, and the director were sitting in the stalls. And they did the whole play, and of course when it finished, the curtain didn't come down. They just stood there like Madame Tussauds. And for reasons that were later explained, JB Priestley and the director got up and walked out. And from the stage, Fred Emney said, well, if he didn't like it, he shouldn't have written it. Casting my eye over this vast tapestry of Priestley, I thought, what on earth can I choose? And thanks to the Oldie magazine, I came upon this, written in 1934 by J.B. Priestley in his English Journey book. Get the resonance of this with today. The leader writers in the cheap press began yelping again about keeping the foreigner out. Apart from the miserable meanness of the attitude itself, for the great England, the England admired throughout the world, is the England that keeps open house, the refuge of Mazzini, Marx, Lenin. History shows us that the countries that have opened their doors have gained, just as the countries that have driven out large numbers of its citizens for racial, religious or political reasons have always paid dearly for their intolerance. Behind all the new movements of this age, nationalistic, fascistic, communistic, has been more than a suspicion of the mental attitude of a gang of small-town louts ready to throw a brick at the nearest stranger. J.B. Priestley, 1934. Ponder on that. Moving on now to John Betjeman, poet laureate, but what a most interesting range. One moment he'd be writing a hymn of praise to a big girl playing tennis, and then you'd read another poem of his that said, come friendly bombs and fall on Slough. That was to do with his passion for architecture. That was really fascinating. Here is Potpourri from a Surrey Garden by John Betjeman, read by Sheila Steafel.
Miles of pram in the wind and Pam in the gorse track, coconut smell of the broom and a packet of weights pressed in the sand, the thud of a hoof on a horse track, a horse-riding horse for a horse track. Conifer County of Surrey, approached through remarkable wrought iron gates. Over your boundary now, I wash my face in a bird bath. Then, which path shall I take? That over there by the pram? Down by the pond? Or, yes, I will take the slippery third path, trodden away with gym shoes, beautiful fur-dry alley that leads to the bountiful body of Pam. Pam, I adore you, Pam. You great big mountainous sports girl. Whizzing them over the net, full of the strength of 5. That old Malvernian brother, you zephyr and khaki shorts girl, although he's playing for Woking, can't stand up to your wonderful backhand drive. See the strength of her arm, as firm and hairy as Hendron's. See the size of her thighs, the pout of her lips, as cross and full of a pent-up strength she swipes at the rhododendrons. Lucky the rhododendrons. And flings her arrogant lovelock back with a petulant toss. Over the redolent pine woods, in at the bathroom casement, one fine Saturday, Windlesham bells shall call. Up the Butterfield aisle, rich with Gothic enlacement, licensed now for embracement, Pam and I, as the organ thunders over you all.
He'd written about Joan Hunter-Dunn playing tennis, and that was another lady called Pamela. What is it about him, the great man? I saw him interviewed later in his life, and the interviewer said, "Any regrets?" He said, "Not enough sex." Very moved by that, very moved by that. Surely he wasn't averse to it. No pun intended and none achieved. A man was sending in puns to his local paper. They were holding a competition, and he sent in 10 puns. And the mate said, "Did any of them get in the paper?" He said, "No pun in 10 did." Now, please groan, it helps the acoustics. We move on to an old friend who I've known for 50 years, Alan Bennett. We never met in Leeds, both from Leeds, never met there. I met him when he was doing Beyond the Fringe here in London. I'd like to tell you a little story which epitomises Alan Bennett. Somebody told me they were at a dinner party years ago, and Alan had written The Madness of George III. Do you remember that? And they changed the title in America because they thought the audience might think it was a sequel. So it was The Madness of King George. But at the time it was at the National Theatre, The Madness of George III. And a couple at a dinner party said, "We went to the theatre last night." And somebody said, "What did you go and see?" And they said, "The Madness of George III." And the woman on the other side turned round and said, "What was that about Thora Heard?" Now, I thought if anybody should hear that story, it's Alan. So I rang up and told him it. And he doesn't laugh on the phone, he groans. A few days later, I got one of his immaculately written little notes. "Rehearsals have commenced for The Madness of Thora Heard. The curtain rises to the clash of Zimmer frames." Alan Bennett's sermon from Beyond the Fringe, read by Bernard Cribbins.
As I was on my way here tonight, I arrived at the station and, by an oversight, I happened to go out by the way one is supposed to come in. And as I was going out, an employee of the railway company hailed me. "Hey, Jack," he shouted, "where do you think you're going?" Well, that, at any rate, was the gist of what he said. But you know, I was grateful to him because, you see, he put me in mind of the kind of question I felt I ought to be asking you here tonight. Where do you think you're going? Very many years ago, when I was about as old as some of you are now, I went mountain climbing in Scotland with a very dear friend of mine. And there was this mountain, you see, and we decided to climb it. And so very early one morning we arose and began to climb. All day we climbed up and up and up, higher and higher and higher, until the valley lay very small below us, and the mists of the evening began to come down and the sun to set. And when we reached the summit, we sat down to watch this magnificent sight of the sun going down behind the mountain. And as he watched, my friend very suddenly and violently vomited. Some of us think life's a bit like that, don't we? But it isn't. Life, you know, is rather like opening a tin of sardines. We are all of us looking for the key. And I wonder how many of you here tonight have wasted years of your life looking behind the kitchen dressers of this life for that key. I know I have. Others think they've found the key, don't they? They roll back the lid of the sardine tin of life. They reveal the sardines, the riches of life therein, and they get them out. They enjoy them. But you know, there is always a little bit in the corner you can't get out. I wonder, is there a little bit in the corner of your life? I know there is in mine.
Moving on to Philip Larkin. Wild Oats by Philip Larkin, read by Sheila Steafel.
About 20 years ago, 2 girls came in where I worked. A bosomy English rose and a friend in specs I could talk to. Faces in those days sparked the whole shooting match off, and I doubt if ever one had, like hers. But it was the friend I took out. And in 7 years after that, wrote over 400 letters, gave a 10-guinea ring I got back in the end, and met at numerous cathedral cities unknown to the clergy. I believe I met Beautiful twice. She was trying both times, so I thought, not to laugh. Parting, after about 5 rehearsals, was an agreement that I was too selfish, withdrawn, and easily bored to love. Well, useful to get that learned. In my wallet are still 2 snaps of bosomy rose with fur gloves on. Unlucky charms, perhaps.
What is it with the great poets? As I said earlier, John Betjeman, regret not enough sex. Philip Larkin once wrote about sex began in 1963. Remember that? A bit late for him, he claimed. Were they sublimating it, using poetry as a substitute, an alternative rhythm method? I don't know. But casting my mind aloft, and indeed aside, I remembered trying to devise a TV show about priests trapped in the jungle. I'm a celibate, get me out of here. But enough of that. Another master of the form, a master of the short poem, the great Ogden Nash. And I was with an old friend from university days recently, Tony Harrison, the poet. And we're both fans of Ogden Nash. And Tony reminded me, if you'll pardon me mentioning this, of a 4-line poem I wrote at university over 50 years ago, and I'd forgotten it. Lot became rather peeved when his sex life came to a halt. Well, wouldn't you, if you had to make do with occasional pinches of salt? How dare I before introducing Ogden Nash? Here's a tribute from a poet, Maurice Bishop, about Ogden Nash. Free from flashiness, free from trashiness, is the essence of Ogden Nashiness. Rich, original, rash and rational, stands the monument Ogden National. Poems by Ogden Nash.
This is the pioneer. I seek in anonymity's cloister not him who ate the first raw oyster, but one who, braving spikes and prickles, the spine that stabs, the leaf that tickles, with infinite patience and fortitude, unveiled the artichoke as food.
The romantic age. This one is entering her teens, ripe for sentimental scenes, has picked a gangling, unripe male, sees herself in bridal veil, presses lips and tosses head, declares she's not too young to wed, informs you pertly you forget Romeo and Juliet. Do not argue, do not shout, remind her how that one turned out.
The great Ogden Nash. The Leeds theme continues. Another old friend, Keith Waterhouse. My old friend from Leeds, a man who didn't even suffer wise men gladly. But always worked. We used to swap jokes about Leeds, about the Leeds man who went to heaven and was greeted at the gates by St. Peter saying, "Come in, you won't like it." Oh, an applause. And the party from Leeds being shown over HMS Victory. He'd shown them all the decks, the cannons and everything. Then they're on the top deck. And there's the brass plaque where Nelson allegedly said, "Kiss me, Hardy." And the guide said, "That's the end of the tour. Any questions?" And the guy from Leeds at the back said, "Howdy, howdy, die." A thought. Did Nelson buy half bottles of Optrex? Moving on. Moving on now to, where are we? Ah, yes. Keith Waterhouse, an epic. This is by him, Noah's Ark, read by Bernard Cribbins.
And God said unto Noah, Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. And Noah said, Sign here, and leave us thou a deposit. And the Lord signed there, and left he a deposit. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And the Lord said unto Noah, Where is the ark which I commanded thee to build? And Noah said unto the Lord, Verily, I have had 3 carpenters off ill. The gopher wood supplier hath let me down, yea, even though the gopher wood hath been on order for nigh upon 12 months. The damp course specialist hath not turned up. What can I do, O Lord? And God said unto Noah, I want that ark finished even after 7 days and 7 nights. And Noah said, It will be so. And it was not so. And the Lord said unto Noah, What seemeth to be the trouble this time? And Noah said unto the Lord, Mine subcontractor hath gone bankrupt. The pitch which thou commandest me to put on the outside and on the inside of the ark hath not arrived. The plumber hath gone on strike. Noah rent his garments and said, The glazier departeth on holiday to Majorca. Yea, even though I offerest him double time. Shem, my son, who helpeth me on the ark side of the business, hath formed a pop group with his brothers, Ham and Japheth. Lord, I am undone. And God said in his wrath, Noah, "Do not thou mocketh me about." And Noah kissed the earth and said, "Lord, thou knowest in thy wisdom what it is like with delivery dates." And the Lord, in his wisdom, said, "Noah, my son, I knowest. Why else dost thou think I have caused a flood to descend upon the earth?"
Noah and his wife before the epic voyage. She said, "You're looking worried." He said, "I'm worried." She said, "What? Why?" He said, "We've got 2 of everything on this craft." She said, "Yes, what?" He said, "They're going to start breeding." So the rabbits alone could sink this thing. I'm very worried. But I've had an idea. His wife said, "What?" He said, "I'm going to remove their reproductive bits, issue them with a cloakroom ticket so they can claim them back at the end of the voyage." This he duly did, and the ark set off into the hail, the tempest and the storm. Little chimpanzee and his mate leaning over the edge, looking at all going on. And the mate said to the little chimpanzee, "What are you looking so happy about?" He said, "Who's got the elephant's cloakroom ticket?" Now, moving on. Back in the 70s, I worked with Phyllis Diller at Elstree, a most elegant, articulate, stylish woman. But when she went on the stage, she frizzed her hair up, wore ridiculous clothes and screeched and cackled. And I said, "Phyllis, why do you do that?" And she said, "To this day, I'm a woman. I want to get noticed." You couldn't believe how she behaved on stage. You probably saw her on television. And Joan Rivers, to this day, said, "Phyllis Diller opened the door for all of us." A great stand-up. And I'll just quote briefly. My wife and I have just had a golden wedding. This is Phyllis on the subject of golden age weddings. "A bride of 80 should not carry lilies. If she does, she should be careful to keep her eyes open during the ceremony." More gems, Phyllis Diller's marriage manual, read by Sheila Steafel. To achieve this portrayal, Miss Steafel is now donning a wig.
First and foremost, get married with a feeling it is going to last. Not like the bride I knew who doubled the wedding cake recipe and froze one. Remember, beauty isn't everything. And sometimes the most handsome men make the worst husbands, and vice versa. One of my friends who is happily married has a husband so ugly, she met him when a friend sent him over to her house to cure her hiccups. No, let me tell you. A discussion that starts, "I'll tell you something you do that irritates me, if you tell me something I do that bothers you." It never ends in hugs and kisses.
We move now to possibly the absolute master, P.G. Wodehouse. Jeeves and Worcester, what ho Jeeves, I am joined by Mr. Bernard Cribbins. I, with no sense of my limitations, will be essaying the role of Bertie with Bernard in the role of Jeeves.
Yes, sir.
Well, Jeeves, here we are, what?
Yes, sir.
I mean to say, home again.
Precisely, sir.
Seems ages since I went away.
Yes, sir.
Have a good time at Ascot?
Most agreeable, sir.
Win anything?
Quite a satisfactory sum, thank you, sir.
Good. Well, Jeeves, what news on the Rialto? Anybody been phoning or calling or anything during my abs?
Mr. Fink Nottle, sir, has been a frequent caller.
Mr. Fink Nottle?
Yes, sir.
You don't mean Mr. Fink Nottle?
Yes, sir.
But Mr. Fink Nottle's Not in London?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm blowed. And I'll tell you why I was blowed. I found it scarcely possible to give credence to his statement. This Fink Nottle, you see, was one of those freaks you come across from time to time during life's journey who can't stand London. He lived year in and year out, covered with moss, in a remote village down in Lincolnshire, never coming up even for the Eton and Harrow match. And when I asked him once if he didn't find the time hang a bit heavy on his hands, he said no, because he had a pond in his garden and studied the habits of newts. Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
You got the name correctly? Fink Nottle?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's the most extraordinary thing. It must be 5 years since he was in London. He makes no secret of the fact that the place gives him the pip. Until now, he has always stayed glued to the country, completely surrounded by newts.
Sir?
Newts, Jeeves. Mr. Fink Nottle has a strong newt complex. You must have heard of newts. Those little sort of lizard things that charge about in ponds.
Oh, yes, sir. The aquatic members of the family Salamandriae, which constitute the genus Mulga.
This concludes our selection, a roll on the drums and a sandwich on the piano. I would like to thank Sheila Steafel and Bernard Cribbins for their reading. And this wonderful world of writing and writers. I remember somebody asked Victoria Wood where she got her ideas from. And she said, I don't know, but if I ever find out, I'm going to live there. I understand that. I leave you with 2 words from the great Noel Coward. He was cornered by a man who was tired and emotional, who'd had a lot to drink and was feeling no pain. This man said to Noel Coward, I passed your house last night. And Noel Coward said, thank you. And thank you for coming. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.